an article that our colleague John McAvoy published says 2/5 of Keir Starmer's cabinet have been funded by pro-Israel lobbyists. And Matt, you did another article. This was actually 2 years ago. You were already on the case. It says revealed third of cabinet, including Boris Johnson, has been funded by Israel or pro-Israel lobby groups. So do you think this is perhaps a reason why, Matt, that we see the UK government policy is so skewed towards one side of the conflict?
Yeah, I mean, there's two arguments for why there's such undying support for Israel in London, but also Washington and parts of Europe. One is that Israel is a sort of imperial outpost and provides a landing strip and lots of other functions for the Western Empire. And I think that probably was true for quite a while, but I don't think that's the main reason now. I think that the main reason, because as you said, even maybe when that was more the case, there was a more balanced policy towards Israel. Now it's just so tilted one way; it's absurd. And I think that the way that that's happened is there's been a huge operation done in those imperial capitals, particularly London and Washington, by the Israel lobby. And they've managed to get away with it because people have been very, very scared, reputational risk, other risks to go up against it. And because it's all out in plain sight. You mentioned that article I did about the third of the cabinet when Boris Johnson was prime minister, including Boris Johnson, had been funded by the Israel lobby. No one covered that. It's never been in the mainstream media. It was just out there, ready to be picked up. I think that has changed recently. I think that this current conflict, because it's so barbaric, and the propaganda we've been we've had to submit to from the media, but also from the political class, is so obviously contradicted by what's happening on the ground in Gaza that I think that kind of contradiction is hard to is not holding anymore. But I think that to directly answer your question, I think it is the power of the Israel lobby, and I think it's extremely powerful in the UK, and it's across the political spectrum, as you mentioned. So the Conservative Friends of Israel is the main body which cultivates conservative politicians, and they've said previously that 80% of Conservative MPs are members. Now, importantly, they don't reveal their funders and never have. We can take a guess about who might fund them, and if you look at the programs that they put on for often new MPs, they have access to the highest echelons of the Israeli government, the military, and intelligence. So it's effectively, I don't think it's too much to say it's an arm of the Israeli state in Britain. And within the Conservative Party. And there's another one on the Labour side called Labour Friends of Israel, which again doesn't reveal its funders, has huge amounts of MPs and Labour lords as members. The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is actually an officer within it. Again, they don't reveal their funders. No one seems, that's not a problem for anyone. Again, you can guess who they might be. And the way that those two institutions operate is that they cultivate MPs very early on in their careers. So the story I did recently was about how James Cleverly, who was formerly the Foreign Secretary, has just become Home Secretary, but he was Foreign Secretary for a large part of this crisis, and Suella Braverman, who was Home Secretary. Their first trip that they'd gone on as new MPs after 2015 was funded by Conservative Friends of Israel, and they were taken to Israel, given a propaganda tour of Israel, went to the West Bank with their Israeli minders, and then we videoed saying, well, Israel's a wonderful country. That's what James Cleverly said. I'd recommend everyone comes here. And then Suella Braverman said in her clip, the Conservative Friends of Israel does such an important job for educating MPs. And the Labour Friends of Israel does the same thing. So you've got this whole machine which is set up to cultivate a political class across the spectrum that gives undying support to Israel. And that is the major problem that we have. And I think that is the one that going forward that needs to be exposed. And I think that people need to be braver, because I understand why the sensitivities around the history of anti-Semitism in Europe and certain anti-Semitic tropes, but the fears around those sensitivities, which are exploited, by the way, by the Israel lobby themselves, has stopped people wanting to really analyze the pressure points that are put on the political class in this country. I would say as well, just it also goes for the US lobby or the US influence in Britain. Hardly, again, we've done at Declassified nearly all the work on what the US military and intelligence presence is in the UK in recent years. In fact, we've got 12,000 US troops in this country that no one's ever mentioned in the mainstream media. Literally, that figure has never been mentioned in the mainstream media. So it is part of a general problem with the media, but I think that things need to change now, and I think that that's why we have such undying support.
Well, just as you mentioned there, Matt, some of this evidence is there, but just doesn't get picked up on. I mean, for me, one of the most compelling articles you wrote about this issue was former British minister, the Israelis think they control the Foreign Office, and they do. And that was a quote from Alan Duncan, who was a foreign minister, UK foreign minister. He wrote it in his memoirs, and he was subject to an attempt by the Israeli embassy to smear him effectively and get him removed from that position because they were so concerned about his sympathies to the Arab world. He was seen as more on the kind of pro-Arabist tradition, when there used to be this divide in Whitehall. So I urge people who might think, oh, that this Israel lobby idea is a bit kind of conspiratorial, to actually read that article, because that is coming directly from the horse's mouth from a British government minister who saw this firsthand, the amount of power that the Israel lobby now have on British foreign policy. And actually, for me, looking back at some of our coverage of the war in Yemen, where we were very focused on the role that the arms industry played, BAE Systems in particular, the amount of money they were making from arming the Saudi Air Force, which was brutally bombarding Yemen. We were very focused on the revolving door between the arms industry and ministers. But then there were statements that I think, particularly when James Cleverly was Foreign Secretary, he would make, saying, we need to do this because the Houthis, the rebel group in Yemen that Saudi was bombing, they're an Iran-backed group. And I was kind of thinking, why is he so focused on the Iran angle? Because in my mind, Iran isn't necessarily a direct threat to the UK. It's a direct threat to Israel. But I mean, there could be formulations where, indeed, in recent history, the UK has signed kind of peace deals effectively with Iran. And I think that's, now we see with the Houthis where they've hijacked this ship off the coast of Yemen. And they are one of the few groups in the Middle East who seem to be able to pursue an independent foreign policy on the side of the Palestinians. And you can see that perhaps that's why someone like Cleverly, who we know has been very heavily lobbied by pro-Israel groups, was taking that stance and highlighting so much the Iran aspect. And I think, that possibly wasn't really a threat to the UK. It was more of a threat to Israel. And that's where that kind of focus was coming from.